everyone. This is Boomer Life Lessons and Stories, and I'm Ron Cross. And I hope you're doing well. I hope this video finds everything going well in your life. And of course, you being safe out there in the environment that we find ourselves in today. It's not an easy environment, but I think we're all doing the best we can, cooperating with one another. So, what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about the 6 things that will help grow your wealth. And these 6 things are fairly common sense and straightforward, but I'm going to leverage a quote. I believe it was by Andrew Carnegie. People say it different ways. I've heard it both ways from authoritative sources. If you think you know the proper way to say his last name, please drop a note down below and let me read it, and I'll check your sources out. But in any case, Andrew Carnegie was a wealthy industrialist, and he had a unique way of looking at things. And he looked at opportunities and assets and resources in terms of how he could turn it into something that would create an income stream for him. He had some interesting insights in terms of the things that we pay cash for and the things that we might end up financing. But before we go there with his quote, let's go ahead and, if you could, help me out by liking, sharing my channel with others, and subscribing. That will certainly benefit me in terms of the YouTube algorithm, and it will help me reach other people. If you like the content that I have created and am continuing to create, if I've said something useful, that would be great just by clicking this subscribe box. All right, with that, let's go ahead and find out what he said. Now, I'm going to give you his quote because it's the first 2 things. I'm going to give it to you in piece parts. He said, well, first off, he said, if you have debt, pay it off, right? Who's that sound like? Sounds like Dave Ramsey, right? Dave Ramsey is one of the advocates of paying off your debt and then building wealth from that by not using credit, but just using cash. Sounds great, but it's hard to implement, hard to get started. But people that do that do see great benefits from it. So the first thing that you should do is focus on your budget. How much money do you have coming in? How much money do you have going out, right? And that the money that's going out would be paying for your livelihood, the shelter, the food, the water, transportation, all that basic stuff that you need to have and do in order to just live a regular life. So then you have to look at your obligations. Your obligations may be credit card debt, or it might be a mortgage, your house payment. But the things that perhaps are more concerning is credit card debt. Why? Because it's at higher interest rates, and it's easy to get in the habit of spending and not saving. Credit cards are so seductive. You see something you want, you whip out the credit card and you buy it without any consideration of the future consequences. So the first thing that you really should do in terms of focusing and paying off your debt is to minimize the outflow of cash, right? You want to take what is necessary and sufficient for you to take care of your family, take that money, pay the bills in terms of your food, your rent or your mortgage, your transportation, the things that allow you to go to work every day, and take care of your family by paying those bills. Then you want to focus on what's left over and use that to reduce your debt. Now here is the confession I gave in a previous episode. If you've been watching me through all the episodes that I've produced, I said that in the 80s, and I graduated from college in 1979, in the mid 80s, my wife and I literally woke up one morning and we found out that we were $14,000 in debt. Holy mackerel, $14,000, that's a lot of money. That was when a college new hire was probably making somewhere around, I don't know, $30,000, $40,000 a year. So that type of debt at that time, and I wasn't a college new hire, I was 5 years out of college, but that type of debt was significant. So my wife and I did literally what I just described to you. We looked at what our cash flow was, the money coming in, the money going out. We started saving the money and we cut down on unnecessary spending. And we used that money to pay off our debt. And then once we paid off our debt, then we went about looking for investments. The other thing that we did, and what we found, was that as we received an annual increase once the debt was paid for, we took that annual increase, whether it was 3%, 5%, or 10%, whatever it was at that time, we just saved it. We invested it in stocks and bonds, and we saved it in other types of assets. So every time, for probably 3 to 5 years, every time I got an increase, I saved that. I didn't spend above what I was earning before all these increases came about. And because I'd paid the debt off, the money built up to a nice little sum. So the problem is that when we look at the credit card as the example, it becomes so very easy to satisfy an impulse need. And it's not really a need, it's a desire. It's buying something that's not necessary. My wife and I, we've always could have afforded some of the finest cars that the manufacturers produce. We've always could have afforded that, but we never went out and bought the top of the line car because we felt it was unnecessary, more than we needed for basic transportation. Now, I plead guilty again a second time because perhaps after we'd done all this investing, I decided that I wanted to go and buy one of my cars to reward myself for the investments and the things that we'd done in our finances. And I bought a Mustang Cobra, and it was a pretty souped up car. I really enjoyed owning that car. I didn't pay cash for it initially, but I've had it paid off in a very, very short amount of time. And I enjoyed that car. And at the time, it was like 1997. I think I paid somewhere in the neighborhood of 23 to 25,000 for it, brand new, something like that. When I sold it about 20 years later, maybe a little less than 20 years, I'd enjoyed it all those years and everything. When I sold it for about $8,400, which was about the going rate. Now, what type of return did I get on that car? The type of return I got on that car was negative. It didn't increase my wealth. The only thing that I generated from that type of purchase was lots of great memories, right? And the pleasure of owning a Mustang Cobra. But actually, in terms of net wealth, it decreased my net wealth because it did not provide a positive return in owning it. So the only reason why I bring that up, it leads into the next item, number 2, that you should be doing. Pay cash for things that depreciate. Now we're talking about things that you need, perhaps. There's a lot of spurious spending that's not needed. But when you have something that you need and it's a sizable purchase, you want to pay, and it depreciates. That means it loses value over time. Excuse me. You want to pay cash for it. As a matter of fact, when I drove that Mustang off the parking lot of the car dealership, the day I bought it, I probably lost 15% of the value of that car because that car went to become a used car, right? It depreciated, and then it proceeded to depreciate each year thereafter. Now, I could have said and rationalized my mind, at some point, this car is going to be worth a lot of money. But when? And what does the track record say? Not likely, right? Now, there are some 1960s and 1970s, early 1970 muscle cars that have just gone sky high in value because there's been a large market for them. People want these old muscle cars, but to depend on something being wanted in the future is folly. The best thing that you can do is make good sound investment. So when you buy something like a car and you know that it's going to begin to lose value, try not to finance it. Why? Because if you finance it, you could very easily end up paying twice for that car, at least 50% or twice for what the car cost you, depending on how much you paid for the car and how long it was financed for. And of course, the rate upon which it was financed or under which it was financed. So what did you do? When you signed that note to buy the car, something that depreciates, you committed future earnings to pay for that car. Future money that could have been directed toward a more lucrative investment that had a positive return, not a negative return. You know, I talk to sometimes my students, and they're talking about when they graduate, they're going to reward themselves. And it's okay to reward you in small ways. But remember, you're preparing for the future. And every time you think of something that you want, if you develop the mentality that I'm going to reward myself, well, you're going to reward yourself into great debt if you don't use cash and you pay for it with a credit card. And you'll wake up like I did in the 80s, but with some larger number because we're in the 2020s, right? So Carnegie was pretty smart. He said, pay cash for things that depreciate. Don't pay twice for them. Don't pay time and a half for them. Pay cash, save up and pay cash for them. So that's number 2. The rest of his quote is number 3. He said, finance the things that appreciate. Well, what appreciates? How about real estate? How about stocks and bonds, generally speaking? Now, yes, there are stocks that go into the tank and the company goes bankrupt and people do lose their investments. Enron is a prime example. You can look up Enron and see what happened. People thought it was an up-and-coming company, but it was doing some fraudulent practices, and it really wasn't worth the money that the market thought it was worth. And when it became known, people had spent their life savings or all their retirement investments were in Enron stock, and within a day or two, Enron stock went to zero. There's stories like that. But we're talking about on the average, generally stocks in good companies have appreciated over time. Appreciate means that they become more dear, they rise in price. And if you go back in the history of the stock market, which is probably late 1700s, early 1800s here in the United States, the stock market has on average returned 10 to 12% per year, right? On average. Some years it's done a lot more, some years it's done less, but on the average, 10 to 12%. So if you spend $1 today, at the end of the year, you're going to have $1.12. If you spend $100,000 today on investment, at the end of the year, you're going to have $112,000 if the appreciation happens like the average would suggest that it does. There's no guarantee about future stances. You understand that, right? We can only go look at history as an indicator. We can make decisions based on the present ground truth, how well the company's operating, how well are its products and services received, that sort of thing. But when we go to buy something like real estate, we want to buy something that appreciates. Then Andrew Carnegie says, yeah, finance it. It's okay. Now, you go back to Dave Ramsey, and Dave Ramsey would say, no, pay cash for it. And I can certainly understand why he says that, because if you're carrying large amounts of debt, you become less able to take care of emergencies and crises that might happen in your normal life because you're having to service the debt. You're paying the current debt at the sacrifice of future earnings. And that means you can't save up a nest egg to protect against those emergencies, and you can't invest to increase your wealth. I've told students also in another class that I taught at the university, I taught engineering economy, and basically it's talking about cash flow streams, future value. And at some point, if you invest properly in things that appreciate, that also provides a return, an annual return, not just that they appreciate, then at some point your investments could be making a lot more money than you earn in your salary working for a large American corporation. It does happen, right? So how does real estate as an example? Now, by the way, guys, I'm not advocating this. I'm using this as an example. I do hold real estate, and it does pay me a nice sum. But I'm not advocating that for you. I'm just using it as an example. The example is simply this, that if you buy a house and it's a rental house, and let's say you pay $100,000 for it, and you rent it out for $1,000 a month, well, that means you've got $12,000 of revenue coming in from that house that you've rented out. Now, basically, you've got to pay for the maintenance and repair. Let's say you paid cash for the house. You got to pay for the maintenance and repair for it. You've got to also pay for the real estate taxes, and there's other expenses that you may or may not be aware of. You have to take care of the lawns. You have to take care of pest control, things of that nature. So all of that rolls up into the fact that you may only get 80% of that revenue coming in as earnings. Well, 80% of $12,000 is what? Is it about $9,600? What do you do with that $9,600? You go off and spend it? No. You save it and invest it and buy more assets that appreciate over time. Now let's go back to the house. Let's say you hold that house for 15 years and you sell it. Are you going to sell it for the same price you bought it for? No. Are you going to sell it for less? Not likely if you took care of the house and you maintained it properly, right? Now, there are occasions where people sell their houses for less because it's not worth that much on the market because they didn't take care of it, right? There's lots of reasons for that. But if you buy smartly and you maintain your assets, then when you sell it, you could end up selling it for 3 times the amount. My parents bought a house we grew up in. They paid, I think, about $7,800 for it. That was in 1962. They turned around and sold it in, I believe, around 1977. My sister and brother will probably correct me on this, but somewhere around there. And they sold it for more than 3 times what they had paid for it. Why did they sell it for more than 3 times? Because it had appreciated. They got the benefit of living in the house, and then they made money when they sold it. So when you sell your rental house, as an example, after 15 years, you now received all the earnings from renting it out, plus you're going to receive more for that house when you sell it than you paid for it. Why? Because it appreciated. And that's the reason why Carnegie says it's okay to finance an investment that appreciates, or finance something that appreciates. Okay, I'm running a little long. We're at 15 minutes. I'll try to speed it up just a bit. So you want to really grow your wealth by creating multiple income streams. You have your salary that's coming in, you use your salary and you keep your expenses low, you build up a nest egg, you invest, and then your investments begin to create income streams for you. So look at ways to create multiple income streams. It might be that you're interested in real estate. It might be that you're interested in bonds. Be careful with bonds. Bonds values go up and down inversely to what the interest rates do. So you go and investigate that and look at that. It might be informing to you. But bonds say, hey, if I buy a corporate bond, I'm going to give the corporation $1,000 or $10,000 of my savings. And then over the next period of years, whatever the life of that bond is, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, they're going to pay you an interest rate on the use of your money. And then at the end of the life of the bond, they're going to make the last interest payment to you and return your initial investment. That's pretty good, isn't it? Right? But be careful. There's junk bonds as well, and junk bonds can end up being zero. But you get the idea. You want to pay for something that's going to appreciate and pay for something that's going to initiate another income stream. The more income streams that you create, whether it's a hobby that generates income, whether it's a side job that you have, or whether it's investments returning a stream of income to you, you build wealth by creating multiple income streams. You invest, you invest, you invest. That is number 5. You don't spend, spend, spend. If you spend everything that you have coming in, you'll have nothing left over to invest to create these multiple income streams or to buy assets that appreciate over time. If you spend everything that you have, at the end of the day, when you need the money back in your investments and you didn't invest, all you're going to have are good memories. You're not going to have something that's going to be good for you in your retirement and your golden years, or even sooner. There are people retiring at 42 and they're doing things that they want to do. They may have a job, but they don't have to work, right? They're doing it because they like it. So people retire at all ages. But if you spend everything that you have coming in, you have nothing to invest, and you spend more with credit cards, you're not going to be very flexible in terms of handling crises, and you're not preparing for a future state, which is a retirement where your investments are paying you more money than your salary. And it can happen. I can guarantee you that. But you have to invest wisely. You don't want to invest simply on your own. Some people do. I went off and took a course and got my license as an investment banker as I was working in industry, working as an engineer. I have a Series 7 stockbroker's license. I no longer retain it, but back in the 90s I did because I wanted to understand how it all worked, how companies went public from just being an idea to some stand-up of a firm or corporation that turned the crank of a product or service and made money. So invest, invest, invest. Don't spend, spend, spend. That was number 5. Now, after having done the investing and setting up the multiple income streams and keeping your expenses low, that means paying cash for as much as you can and not buying the latest toy, because if you try to keep up with the Joneses like we did in the 80s, you're going to find out that you're spending more money than you have. So don't do that. At the end of the day, when you've invested well or you've achieved a milestone, reward yourself. Okay? Reward yourself. Don't go overboard because you still want to be a good steward of your assets and resources and continue to grow them, because they will bear fruit continually in the future and let you have an early retirement or a good retirement with good money coming in, so that you don't allow your standard of living to drop once you enter into retirement. But once you achieve a milestone or a goal, go ahead and take that trip with your family that you've always wanted to. Go ahead and perhaps buy the boat that you wanted, but be careful, boats depreciate, right? But after you've achieved something, reward yourself in a small way, but not so large a way. Because if you begin spending off your assets, then they're not going to be generating the money again, the income streams, and you're going to lose ground. And if you continue to do that, you will end up being broke. Why do you think the people that win the lottery, and we're talking about millions of dollars, end up broke? They don't invest. They spend themselves into bankruptcy. So the idea here in terms of growing your wealth is to invest smartly while minimizing spending and paying cash as much as you can for assets and resources that you need to live your daily life. But on occasion, if you see an asset that you want to invest in that will appreciate, that's okay. Now, again, Dave Ramsey would say pay cash even for real estate and things of that nature. But if you do all this, you will build your wealth. And I'm here to tell you it does work. So with that, my friends, take care. I hope I've said something that has been of benefit to you. Be all you can be, and I will be talking to you at some future point in the next video. All the best.